Hey there you, today's species feature video is going to be covering the Nimbochromis Venustus, a large predatory hap species from Lake Malawi in Africa. I think we'll like this one. See you on the other side. What we're looking at here is my breeding colony of Venustus. I'll just say at the outset I am a breeder first and foremost, so my tanks aren't necessarily pretty in terms of landscaping, they're functional in terms of breeding. Let's get on to the derivation of the naming, which is where I kind of like to start my videos. The genus Nimbochromis is two words slammed together. Nimbo coming from the Latin nimbus, which is to do with cloud structure, and presumably the cloud that they're referring to is the blotchy markings on the sides of the fish, which can sort of help them with their hunting behaviour, which is an interesting thing that they do, which we'll talk about later. The chromis is, I think, a Greek derivative for colour. In this case, that it does have some sort of vague Latin derivation to perch-like fish, but I think the colour chromis is much more appropriate, especially with the colourful Lake Malawi cichlids. The species name Venustus is derived from the Latin Venus, which derives from the goddess of love and beauty, and presumably the thinking here is that the male in particular is a very attractive and elegant fish when it's in adult and breeding dress, and overall the generic name combined with the species name and the derivations that they've chosen are very descriptive in this case for this species. It really gives a good account of what they were thinking when they named the fish. This species is endemic to Lake Malawi, and it's got a distribution throughout the entirety of the lake. The habitat it prefers is slightly deeper water, over sandy bottom, over rocky reef. It doesn't really have a preference on that. It's a hap species, so it's up off the bottom in regular swimming mode. The size of these things is listed at around the 25 centimetre mark, and I believe that to be pretty accurate. I've certainly had examples, and we'll see later, that this male in my colony is probably at 22 centimetres right about now, and presumably you're going to get bigger than that in the wild. So I'm happy that the literature is realistic on this one. The diet of this fish is, given that it's a bigger fish, it's a predator. It's what we call an ambush predator, and it's feeding a carnivorous diet where it is catching smaller fish, anything that it can fit in its mouth, and its method relates back to the coloration that we talked about earlier, where it will kind of bury itself in the substrate to a level, if not lie there and basically play dead and look like it's a dead fish, and the blotching will potentially trick smaller fish into thinking that is a dead fish, or it is just camouflaged well enough that it waits till something comes within snatching distance, and that's its go. It erupts out of that sand and she's all over. Now the good news is that in the tank situation, these things are super easy to feed. They readily, as we can see, take pellets. I'm feeding a couple of different size pellets here, which allows them to choose the one that appeals the most. The temperament of these things is listed in literature as being aggressive, both towards its own species and other species. I'm going to put out a little theory here, which I'm happy for you to comment on in the description section down below on your thoughts. I've not found this to be a particularly aggressive fish at all in my experience in the last 20 odd years of keeping. And I know, like all animals, you can get rogues that are more aggressive than not, than others if it's tight. But my take on it is that this species has not been legal to import into Australia for near on 30 years. I think it was in the late 90s that the grey list, the white list was established in Australia, and that basically saw a huge reduction in the number of species that we were allowed to import into the country. And yeah, Nimbochromis as a genus was banished back in the late 90s. So the broodstock that we're running around with in Australia are basically 30 years of removal from any potential new stock from the lake via the good exporters. And I would argue that 30 years of tank-bred fish has sort of led us to a more peaceful version of the animal. They're, we've all probably had a fish at some point that we think, my God, why is this thing so cranky? Other people's don't have this trouble, and I guess people that selectively breed are maybe going to go around that fish. So I don't know. I know behaviour is an innate sort of characteristic of fish, but I just think that we might have sort of bred out a bit of the aggression in this species. Given the size of the animal, I've never had any trouble keeping this fish in a tank with smaller animals. And back to what we were talking about with diet, I don't think I've ever seen one eat a fish. Within reason, obviously. If fry gets spat in a tank, they're going to go. That's a given. But I've been able to release fish at sort of 3 centimetres in that in the wild would have been a snack, and my experience is that they generally get through. So, as I said, if you've got any thoughts on that, one way or the other, drop it in the comments, and I'd be interested to get your thoughts. The parameters that I run with for keeping these guys is a pH, in my case, at about 7.8 to 8. They'll handle sort of 7.2 right up to 8.4. The hardness that I run with, I don't actually measure hardness. I have a regime of adding my own salts, but I'm sure if I tested it, it would come out as a hard water. I think in the literature we're looking at sort of 10 to 20 degrees of hardness. That's the mineral and metals content of your water. The one that I do pay a little bit of attention to is temperature. They will handle sort of 24 to 28 degrees Celsius. I tend to run these guys at about 26, which I find is the sweet spot for, they'll still be breeding, but they're not sort of hyper active, because at higher temperatures you're going to get more activity, more aggression, and with that can come consequences. You're burning more food, but you're also running the risk of, a fish gets injured in a fight, and with an more aggressive situation, stress layers onto that, and you get a bit of a spiral. So middle of the range for me for temperature on these, 26 degrees. The tank size you go with these is really up to you. You can go as big as you want, that goes without saying. I wouldn't go any smaller than the sort of 1.2 long, and the tank we're filming here is 60 centimetres into the shelf, and 45 centimetres tall, which gives us 305, 10 litres ish in volume. That's sort of 4 by 2 by 18 in the old. The other thing I'll say, they like being up high. I think that any time that you're not looming over the top of your fish, they seem to be a much happier critter. In terms of filtration, once again, write your own check on what you want to provide. That will give you good quality filtration and clean water nitrate removal. We're obviously feeding big fish here, so there can be a bit of waste generated. I'm running my sponge filters with the souped up K1 fluid bed reactors on top to achieve good filtration. You can see a video on that if you want to go and have a look on my channel. And I am running just a small internal filter here, which is more for a bit of surface agitation and oxygenation than anything. It's very Mickey Mouse in terms of what it filters out of the water. Sexing these fish is pretty easy with mature fish. They're what we call dimorphic, where we have two different sets of colours. The females are the blotchy fish without much colour on them, and that blotchy pattern, I think, is where the giraffe cichlid common name derives from. The males are obviously the much more brightly coloured fish and also a tiny bit bigger. Breeding these fish, these are a maternal mouth brooding cichlid, where if you want to breed these in a tank, I'd be recommending sort of at least 8 fish. I think I've got 9 in my colony currently, which there's an obvious male, and then there's, with amongst the other 8, I don't know whether I've got a sneaker male in there. I suspect I'm highly female ratio and it's working well for me. These guys can produce a significant number of eggs. This is one mouthful from one of my young females here. I estimate 80 odd eggs in this particular clutch, and I've seen them go close to 100 in previous catchings. The next little bit I'm going to show is some live footage of me having a harvesting of my colony, and the reason I wanted to show this part was that there's a particular bit of knowledge that I've gained over the many years of working with them, and I think it's important to share knowledge when we can. I'm getting ready to do some work with my Venustus colony today. I believe I've had a couple of females holding for a time, and it's time to get in there and get those out. One thing I've learned with this species in particular is they are notorious for spitting when you try and net them, and so I've done some prep ahead of time to try and illustrate that point, and ironically I did prove it to myself by disturbing the fish on that journey. What you'll notice about my tank up here is that I've taken all the habitat out, I've taken my filters out, I've removed all obstructions because I want to net these fish as gently as possible. The setup I use in advance is to get some tubs of water ready to strip the fish into, and I usually, if I make a guess on how many fish I think I've got holding, but I get a number of options available there. I also have a couple of buckets set up down here. I've got 2 species of fish running in this tank, and I set up a bucket of water for each species, and obviously we're on the clock because I don't have air in this. And then I have a tub over the back there with all the crap that's come out of my tank, and I like having the tub because invariably our bristlenose will turn up from somewhere and I don't want them on the floor. Now the key goal here is I'm about to try and net some of these fish. I've mentioned in other videos I'm visually impaired, so it's hard for me to see necessarily the exact fish I'm after. And one of the features of the Venustus is because they've got such a big head on them, they're not prominent at showing that they're holding at the best of times. Now what I'm going to try and do is just sort of encourage fish to go directly into a corner, and I like to net one fish at a time, especially with a species like this. Now I suspect this is actually a subdominant male. It's a big, fat, healthy looking fish, and that one I can tell is not holding. What happened in the setup that I forgot to go on with is you'll notice down here, in the process of taking out a pipe, which I suspected was going to have the maboonas in here, which are the Pseudotropheus cyaneus. Unfortunately, there was a female Venustus holding, and I got a net full of fish, and she spat them out as they do, and it just makes a hell of a mess because you've got fish flapping around and you've got little baby fish. Now I'm going to try and get our big boy out of the way here. This is our breeder male, as you can see by the fantastic colour, and he's obviously a bit of a handful in the net. That's a beautiful example of the species. Sorry, I'll get a better grip. I'd estimate that's at least 20 centimetres in length, and good deep body profile, which is what we're looking for. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, these are no longer a permissible import, so the breed stock we're working with in Australia is what we have, and you certainly need to be mindful of where you get your fish and whether people have managed to hybridise these things with Livingstoni and other species from the genus. Thankfully these fish are... Right, so there we go. Look, she's... here's our other female that was holding. She's let all those babies go straight into the net. So I want to contain her now, because if she gets her tail under that batch of fry and goes flick, we end up with a hell of a lot of fish on the floor, on the wall, on the ceiling. So I'm confident she's spat everything into the net. So I'm just going to rinse her off, get those little fishies that are stuck on her body, and you can see how many there were. Her mouth, she's clearly empty by now, I believe. So she can go into my bucket down there, and we're just going to quickly concentrate our remaining babies into our nets, and we're going to invert that into our tub. And
there's a couple left, like...
Yep, so
yeah,
these will all go into the same fry tank, so I can sort of, doesn't matter which tub I go into. And that's
all good.
That's the pro tip I can give you on this species in particular. Notorious for spitting. The net's actually a bit important, and this kind of couples into the substrate choice is important. I like a coarse net, which allows me to chase a fish into the corner. If I can find somebody that's left. And with the fine sand and the coarse net, you can actually sort of do that there, so that if that fish happens to spit onto the bottom, you can net up underneath them and scoop up a lot of those eggs, but the eggs won't go through the net. That's just a nice fat young female, I believe. She's got some good condition on her, and hopefully this water change I'm doing today, will generate some more breeding from them. So that's just what I wanted to show you. This species in particular, hard work at harvesting. I just recommend this. Remove all the things that nets can get caught on. The other thing I forgot to mention is I like that water level down at a height where, as you're approaching with the net, they don't have the option of up and over. Just be as gentle as you can, net a few fish at a time, and you'll get a decent outcome. And if you prepare like this, even when they do spit in the net, you're going to get a good yield. Raising the babies is not challenging as long as you can get yourself a range of smaller food sizes. I call it going through the gears. So these we're looking at here are the 2 mouthfuls of Venustus that came from that last bit of footage. These are about a week on now, in a Zis box in an unrelated tank, and I'm dropping in some fine 300 micron-ish size pellet. And if I could say one thing about this fish, they are more like a pelican than a fish. They just know how to eat, and it's crazy watching them go at it. And later on, when I'll release these into a bigger tank, the noise they make when they hit the food off the surface, it's just a constant little lip smacking of feeding frenzy. They're crazy little critters. The other thing I like about this fish, straight out of the gate you can see that they just mirror the coloration of the adult females. They're already a marvellous little critter, and that makes them a great candidate as a what I call the bread and butter species. They're colourful right out of the gate, at a small size, the sort of size you might pick them up at your local fish shop, and that's a big tick as far as I'm concerned as a species to produce as a breeder. So summing up, do love this fish. They're colourful as juveniles, as just mentioned. The females aren't terrible to look at as an adult fish. The males are obviously the showpiece. They're spectacular, and there's a lot of good reasons to keep this fish. I've had them sort of at various stages in my collection over the journey, and they're a big part of what helps pay the bills and keep the light on for my business. So respect. All right, that's me done. I hope you've gotten something out of the video today, and if so, at the very least, can you give me a like and maybe tell a friend, and so on and so forth. I hope to see you again in the next one.